He was dressed in white, wearing a fake suicide belt, and he opened fire at random, using a machete when he could, until police shot him dead some 9 minutes into his attack. 4 people were killed, including a waitress at a cafe. 22 others were injured, 3 of them critically, on a mild evening in Vienna when Austrians were out enjoying themselves just before their lockdown began.
Bismillah.
The gunman filmed what's known as a martyrdom video. He's 20-year-old Kushtim Fejulai, born in Austria to North Macedonian parents, here pledging allegiance to so-called Islamic State. He had been jailed for travelling to Turkey's border with Syria to join the group last year. Austria's Chancellor visited the crime scene, which was near the city's main synagogue, although that was shut last night. The perpetrators and those behind them will be hunted down, he said.
We must all be aware that this is not a dispute between Christians and Muslims or between Austrians and migrants. No, it's a struggle between the many people who believe in peace and the few who want war. It is a fight between civilization and barbarism, and we will fight this fight with all of our determination.
As the attack unfolded, many Austrians thought the first bangs were fireworks. But restaurants and bars quickly shut, trapping their guests inside. At the State Opera House, an improvised string quartet entertained an audience who were forbidden from leaving until police gave them the all-clear. The Austrian authorities believe last night's attack had only been a matter of time, given that some 90 Austrians are known to have tried to join Islamic State. The question now is whether there were accomplices. Early this morning, police carried out raids on 18 locations, including this one, and arrested 14 people, while the North Macedonian government claimed that 3 dual nationals were involved. It's less than a week since a Tunisian killed 3 people inside a church in the French city of Nice, where at least 4 other suspects are now in custody. France, like Austria, was on the eve of lockdown, and it's now on its highest state of alert. The UK raising its threat level to severe means an attack is not imminent but highly likely, and it's a precaution against any so-called copycat incident.
The British public should be alert but not alarmed. This is a precautionary measure following the terrible incidences that we've seen in France last week and the events that we saw in Austria last night.
Austrians are now asking themselves why the young age of last night's attacker meant he was discharged from jail early, and how did he trick his way through a de-radicalisation programme? Questions too for the rest of Europe, with many dozen convicted terrorists due to be released in the next few years.
Jonathan Rugman reporting. Well, now a short time ago, I spoke to Sasha Havlicek from the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. I asked her what led to the Vienna attack and the attack in France last week.
During the COVID period, our research and other experts' research has shown a mobilization, a sort of increased mobilization online of extremists really across the ideological spectrum. And so there's something of a build-up with essentially no outlet during the lockdown periods. So I think it's right to be cautious. I think there is good reason not to panic, but to be cautious about attacks that may be taking advantage of the freedoms that we have now and that we may lose in a couple of days.
Do you think that that things like the lockdown and general freezing of life in society is in some way generating more activity amongst these people online, and that possibly has led to these sorts of attacks?
It's absolutely true that our research and others' research has shown an increased mobilization online, really across the ideological spectrum during COVID. So capitalizing on the amount of time that people are spending at home and to some extent hijacking or piggybacking off the virality of COVID information and disinformation. We've seen that happen. There's sort of mobilization, but with no outlet during lockdown. And so I think there is a kind of sense of taking advantage of the freedoms when lockdowns are, during these periods of increased freedom. But I think perhaps most importantly, what the Vienna attack shows us, and I hope will be taken into account, is that there is, I think, a need for a review of current assessment and classification protocols for individuals that have served time on terrorist-related offences.
Have you been telling the authorities that this is happening? That in fact there are people coming out of early release and remaining a serious threat to society?
I think that the authorities understand that, but what it requires is a real investment in de-radicalization systems in prison, in probation systems. There are about 4 attacks over the last 5 years that have been the result of individuals who have left prison, basically having tricked the authorities into believing that they were in a position to do so safely.
Now, you've mentioned that you at least are able to see activity online which suggests a reboot of radicalization. And I'm wondering, if you can see that, why can't the authorities see it? And why can't the authorities therefore pressure the online companies to take action?
As we've seen with this case in Vienna, in fact, even as we've seen with some of the content that remains online, for instance, the voice message of one of the French attackers that remains up online and available, this is still falling through the cracks. And so the systems are simply not robust enough.
Sasha Havlicek, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.